Action.
Okay. What's your full name?
Devora.
Your full name, Devora.
Schneider.
Do you have a middle name?
No?
That's it? Devora Schneider?
Yeah.
I don't have a middle name either. Okay, where were you born?
Montreal.
Tell me about your family growing up.
Well, I'm a child of immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
and we spoke only Yiddish at home. And it's as if Canada or Montreal was incidental, because we really lived and grew up in my father's town.
Mm-hmm.
He was a fantastic storyteller, and his shtetl, you know what a shtetl is? His shtetl was where we lived, and we grew up, and it was imbued with all his experiences and the life experiences of the Jewish people. And I went to school, I spoke English, but it was really more incidental than mashmoti, it wasn't of much essence. But as I look back, I was very lucky because I had no fear that there would be a pogrom. I could go out, I could do whatever I wanted. I had no fear of anything outside attacking me, or my parents or anybody else. But life was very hard, and life was very difficult in general. There was very little technology. People worked very hard. And my mother worked hard too, because she worked we had a newsstand. You know what a newsstand is?
Mm-hmm.
So she worked there, and then my brother worked there, and when my mother got sick, so I stopped school and I had to work there too, because it was impossible for my father to carry on by himself. And
How old were you when that happened?
I think I was, I don't know. Well, I was 12 when I was in the hospital with an appendix operation, and I was away from school for about a month. Nothing was modern like now. You had an appendix operation, you went out 2-3 days later. I had a very serious operation, something unusual, and I stayed in the hospital 2 weeks, and then I had to be home. And so I don't remember that. I remember, but I remember that I must have been in high school when my mother took ill, and then I just stopped school and went and worked with my father.
So both your parents owned the newspaper stand?
Yeah, it was their paper, their newsstand, and it was impossible for one person to because it was outside and you froze to death in the winter. So when I was there, I would run inside. We were right in front of Eaton's. Do you know what Eaton's is?
Oh, yeah, I remember.
And Eaton's in Montreal was the largest Eaton's in all of Canada. Did you know that? And it had 9 stories. And so I would run in and warm up and then go out again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what everybody did.
So
Life was difficult, and then there was Zionism, there's no Israel, and at the age of 12, I think I joined Habonim, or my mother joined me there, and I became a Zionist.
Okay, can we pause for a second?
Yeah.
Go, you can go.
You asked why he was angry. Raina?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, look, life was very difficult, and they needed help. And Harry was very bright, and very good looking, very charming, even as a child, and they wanted him to work, and he wanted to play. And he was crazy about sports too. So he was very angry because they didn't understand that he wanted to play. You asked why he was angry. And I didn't I only worked when my mother was sick, and I think Harry was in the army by then, and there was nobody else to take over, to replace my mother.
What's the age difference between you and Dad?
4 years difference.
4 years.
Older?
He was 4 years older.
Well, he
than
wasn't
me.
in the army yet. He joined it.
Eh?
Daddy joined at 17, didn't he?
Yeah, he joined at 17
So she was
because
13.
he wanted to leave
So you were 13 then when you went to work?
something like that.
Yeah.
There were always fights. There were always fighting, and he wanted to play. He was, and he was crazy about sports, so he wanted to participate in that. And I understand this is that they sent. He went to the Talmud Torah because he was a boy, and he didn't like it apparently. So he would skip classes, and my father used to hit him. I was not hit. I didn't get hit.
Your father hit him?
Yeah, used to hit. Harry used to get hit, but not me.
Mm-hmm.
I was a sickly child also. I was born with whooping cough, and
Which was very serious in those days.
yeah. Well, there was nothing but it didn't have the facilities that you have now, or that even let's say 15 years later.
Well, then they didn't even have antibiotics.
No, your father was saved
I know.
only because penicillin had been discovered 2 years ago or something like that, and your mother's uncle or cousin or something or other died of the same thing because there was no penicillin. But when Harry came down with this illness, he was saved because he was given huge doses of penicillin. This is what I know. I mean, saved him. Whether I'm right or not, I don't. That he got it because as a child he had had some child's disease, scarlet fever. I don't know what he had, and it's because it left him vulnerable to it, or with a scar or whatever. That's why he came down with it. And he and your mother went down to New York. She had an uncle there, and they were in horse racing, and they came back a few days later because he wasn't feeling well. And thank God, it was Harry Kramer. Do you remember him? You remember Harry
I
Kramer?
remember the name.
He was our doctor. He was our relative too.
Yeah.
He diagnosed it right away, and and he saved him. He saved his life. He saved my father's life, and he saved my life. Shower. And when Harry got married, and they moved to Maplewood, so I would go and shower there because they had showers. We didn't have it. So, and then there was the war, which was very frightening. And my parents' family lost everybody, and but everybody was your relative. I mean, what was happening to Jews, and I was very frightened when he joined the army. If the Germans ever caught him and found out he was Jewish, what they would do to him. I was very frightened.
What year did he
about
go
that.
overseas? Do you remember?
He was his plan was he'll join the army. It was a volunteer army because the French and the English were enemies,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not going to help the
Quebec
English.
didn't have the conscription.
No conscription.
Right.
So a lot of Jewish boys joined, especially people who were in the Zionist movements. So he joined, and he joined the active army. So they sent him over to Europe.
What year, Devora? Do you remember?
I can't remember.
Okay.
I was in high school then. And he was sent over to England. From England, he was sent over to Europe. And as they were warming up for battle, a tank moved into him. And because he wasn't even injured in a battle. In action. And he was sent back to England.
He broke his leg, right?
Yeah, the femur.
Femur.
Eh?
Femur.
The femur bone.
Right, and he was in Lady Astor's estate, and until he was shipped back to Canada. And then, I think he went crazy because he wouldn't do anything, wanted to make $1 million, and any business that didn't have the potential for $1 million didn't interest him.
Harry? Did you have any contact with him while he was in the army?
I was doing the writing because my parents couldn't write English,
Mm-hmm.
so I wrote all the letters. And you have them.
We have.
so that was the communication, because and he couldn't write. He wrote one Yiddish letter. My father wrote him, and he answered him. He was so overcome with the fact that my father sat down and wrote him a letter that he wrote him back a letter in Yiddish. Remember? I read it with you. And that's it. Then your father met your mother
In Montreal.
in Montreal, right? Because
She
of
met him
Helen.
in the hospital.
Yeah, Helen was in charge in Habonim. We were all in Habonim. And Helen was in charge at that time of looking after or being the liaison with soldiers who were wounded. And so she said, look, I'm going to visit the wounded soldiers. Come with me. So Shirley said she didn't want to go because her uncle or her cousin was coming in and they were going to go to the horse races or whatever. So Helen started preaching, it's not right, it's not this, da, da, da. So Shirley went along and she met Harry and she fell in love with him.
Instantly?
Yeah, it happens.
It does. Did you have what was your relationship like with Shirley?
It was okay. You know, I think your mother deserves the medal because she was very good to my mother.
And your mother wasn't easy to be good to.
Not that much. Once your mother complained to me of something my mother had done, etc. But you know, as I look back, I can't. First of all, it doesn't help, as you know. Blaming your parents for what you are isn't going to help you. And I say to myself, had they done to me what they had done to my mother, what my mother had to go through, I don't know how I would have turned out. And she was really very injurious to all of us. I think most of all to herself.
When you say if they'd done to me what they'd done to her, what do you know that they had done to her? What do you mean by that?
Look, she was subject, not only she, to pogromim all the time, which is tremendous fear, especially as a woman.
Right.
I remember my father describing what they looked like when the Cossacks came on their horses with their spears. He says the first thing the girls did. And then when she was, I think, 8 years old, she was sent out to a village to help working, because the poverty was horrendous then, if you read the Yiddish literature. Mm-hmm. There was really hunger.
Starvation.
Eh?
Starvation.
No, not starvation, but people were hungry. And I don't know, my mother's hands trembled. She cooked, she washed, she baked, she sewed my clothes. I never bought anything. I mean, never was anything bought for me. Everything I wore, my mother made. And she did all this on her own. And once I overheard the women were visiting them, they said, oh, you have Parkinson's disease. So she said, no, I don't have Parkinson's disease because I had this when I was a child, which means something very terrible happened to her because children's hands do not tremble. So I don't know what happened to her. And then they were 7 children, and most of them girls. My mother was the first, and after that came a boy, and he died when he was 2 years old, something like that, which was a disaster, a catastrophe then. And what she went through, but you know, I think she was really a remarkable woman, considering everything going against what she achieved, her will, it was unbelievable. And everybody paid a price, also she did. But up until the end, she was a fighter. And then being refugees from one country to another until they could get to Canada, I don't think that was easy either. So life was hard, but life was hard, I think, for everybody. I don't know where you got the idea, but we had loads of food in the house. That I was hungry is something I wouldn't eat, but that started when I was very little. But we always had plenty of, and my mother, by the way, to correct things, my mother was a very good cook. The food also was very good then. But she was a very good cook. It's not true what your father said.
Why, he said that she wasn't?
Yeah,
No, he said she wasn't a good housekeeper.
that's true. That's true. I had to do that, which I really was crazy about.
Were you close with your mom and dad?
Was I close to my mother?
And your father?
Not really. I mean, at a certain point you learn when to speak, when not to speak. No, my mother, I kept away, I tried to keep away from her, but I couldn't learn from her because she'd start with her curses. I don't know if you know about what Jewish curses are all about, Yiddish ones. If you don't, read Shalom Aleichem.
Give us
you'll
an
find
example.
out.
Do you have an example?
No, never mind. I don't feel like talking. They're very terrible. Shalom Aleichem started writing. He made a list of all the curses his stepmother would use. And Yiddish is very rich in that, seeing that life was so terrible.
So after you left school to help your father...
No, I went back. It was only for a month.
Okay.
I didn't leave school.
I thought you left school to go help with the newsstand.
Right, for a month.
Okay. So then you went back to school.
Better. I graduated.
Where?
High school.
You graduated. Which high school did you go to?
Commercial.
Did you
In
like it?
Montreal, there was you went to either Barenvink. If you're going to university, you took Latin. If you weren't going to go to the university, you took commercial. Well, I wasn't going to go to the university. Guess why?
Why?
No, guess why?
No money.
No money. You needed a fortune to go to the
Right.
university then. So I took commercial, which I didn't like, bookkeeping and shorthand and something. And I graduated high school.
And then what did you do?
And then when the war ended, the Second World War ended, with the GI Bill of Rights, they opened up a university for students to study at night. So I worked during the day and studied at night. Went to a university at night, college at St. George. Still there?
So George Williams.
Yeah. it's still there.
Concordia.
Concordia.
Oh, it's Concordia.
Yeah.
But it's a university now. When I went, it was a college, and you could go to every university. Once you graduated from there, you could go anywhere. Thousands went. I wasn't such a big heroine. And that's what I did. And then I became a Jewish teacher, a Yiddish teacher.
In Montreal.
In Montreal, yes, because the supply of Yiddish teachers from Europe had stopped because of the war. All the Jews, not all, but and so they decided to open up a Jewish teacher seminary with whoever they could find, and I was one of them.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I liked it, but I knew nothing, and I knew how to read Hebrew. But I didn't know one single word, and it was very, very difficult. But my father knew Hebrew, because my father had studied in yeshiva, went to Cheder in yeshiva, and he couldn't speak, but he knew Hebrew. So I studied with him, and I finished that university too, that's the seminar.
So how long were you teaching for?
Oh, for many years, and I taught here too. In Israel. But in Israel I taught English, I couldn't teach Hebrew. I didn't know enough Hebrew to teach here in Israel.
So how did you get to Israel?
I took an airplane.
Okay, so you were teaching Yiddish in Montreal, and then what happened?
Well, I got married, and then I got divorced, and I was
How
teaching.
old were you when you got married?
26.
When did you meet him? How old were you?
I don't know, 25. Who knows? Who cares?
I don't know.
And
So
your
you-
parents made the wedding, because I was living in Toronto,
Why were you living in Toronto?
because I was working there.
Oh, so you worked in Montreal, then you worked in Toronto.
I got a job in Toronto, and your parents made, because the wedding would have to be in Montreal for my parents, and your parents made the wedding. I imagine it was more your mother than your father. She probably knew how to do all those things.
Did you like your wedding?
Did I like?
Your wedding.
You know when I was walking down the aisle, you know what I was thinking of?
What?
This area, whether the seams of my stockings were in the right place.
So then you were in Toronto. And then you went to Israel from Toronto?
I left for Israel from Toronto.
How long were you married for?
We were together 11 years, and then we separated. And I got the divorce in 73, because I was on the kibbutz,
Yeah.
and I wanted to leave the kibbutz, but I knew I couldn't do both. So get a divorce and leave the kibbutz.
Right.
So I left the kibbutz, and then I got the divorce in 73. No, in 73. 67 I came here, right after the war.
And did he go with you?
No, we were we had separated. And in 73 I got the divorce. And the day I got the divorce, you can think whatever you want to think, but this is what happened. I went out of the rabbinate, and I got a Sherut taxi to Magan Michael, where I was staying, and he had the radio on, and on the news came on that the Sabina had been liberated. You know what the Sabina was?
I don't remember.
I'm afraid to look there. The Sabina was a Belgium, I think, let's say I'm right, Belgium airplane that had been kidnapped by Arabs, hijacked, and was in Israel. And Israel made a trick to send in people. They dressed them up. They were soldiers. They were probably crack troops. They dressed them up as people who service airplanes with food,
Mechanics.
and they overcame the hijackers. And when I was on the Sherut, going to back to my kibbutz, the plane had been liberated.
Just like you.
It's sort of like
Nothing
the,
N-Ephes, as they say in Hebrew.
it's
You
like
know
the,
what that means?
No coincidences.
Eh? It means that, but N-Ephes means there's no zero. That there's a meaning, everything happens, there's a meaning.
it's like the Entebbe story, except it happened in Israel, right? That
This happened in Israel. The Entebbe thing happened in Entebbe.
Uganda.
And no, must speak.
Lo-
No.
Oh, now we're
Good
just
song.
getting going. What's the matter with you?
Devora, what did you admire most about your father?
My father was a very, very honest human being. And I think Harry and I both inherited that from him. My mother wasn't. I mean, she wouldn't steal or anything like that. But I'll give you an example. During the war, we had everything. But to show an identification with England, Canada decided to hand out ration books. But we had everything. And one day, and your name was on it, and your address, etc. And one day I found someone lost their ration book, and I found it, and my mother wanted to keep it. So I wouldn't allow it, and I went and I returned it. Because you wouldn't be able to buy anything without it. And we had everything. We lacked for nothing, no chocolates, there was nothing, chaval, we don't have this or we don't have that. We had everything. But my father would never have done a thing like that.
By the way, do you know that they wrote an obituary of her father when he died? Do you remember that?
What?
They wrote about the newsstand when Zadie Yitzhak died.
Who did?
In the papers.
Oh.
Yeah,
His,
because he was like,
it was a big deal, that newsstand.
Oh.
We had been there for like 100 years or something like, no, many years. 20 years or something like that. And he was very charming. And he was a wonderful storyteller.
Was he good looking like Harry and you?
Yeah, he was good looking.
Dark and handsome.
My mother and my father looked alike.
Did they?
It looked good on Zadie Yitzhak, not so good on Bobby Fager.
No, when she was young, she was a very nice looking
Yeah.
woman.
How old was she when she died?
Nobody knows, because they don't know how old they were.
How old were you?
I don't remember. When she died in 67. She died in 67 because I came here in 67. Another coincidence, I was in an ulpan in Ein Shofet. And one day someone said, look, there's going to be a funeral. It's worth your while to come and see what it's like because the cemetery is beautiful. It's right in the heart of a mountain. And this was a soldier of the kibbutz, the Ben kibbutz, who had been killed, and he had been buried somewhere in one of the Arab countries. It was a returning of the Jewish Israeli soldiers.